Welcome back to TheChowTimePod. It's your host, Red. I got a video today for manhood and DNA tests. They're actually becoming mandatory in Tennessee, which is wonderful. Men are finally seeing the light and progress when it comes to laws, balancing out marriage, balancing out some of these things. You know, is it fully balanced? Hell no, it isn't. But it's going there. You know, women are furious, but it's okay. You know, like, we got to talk about this so more states can adopt this, and it just makes it so paternity fraud becomes obsolete, at least in the United States. So please, subscribe down below. I really appreciate that, and let's get to that chow time.
Testing should be mandatory in all U.S. states. How many men in the U.S. are raising another man's child without their knowledge?
According to statistics, like 33, almost 40%. Now, those are all the men that had paternity tests. So if every man did a paternity test, it might be higher.
The fact that women can name any man, and he is on the hook for child support for 18 years, is unjust and unfair. Women claiming those men are fathers when clearly they aren't should spend time behind bars for fraud. How dare she ruin a man's life, his family, his career, and swan off scot-free? Jail belying tow rag.
You are not. You are not.
Freaking Maury Show, man. Why is she happy that he's not the father?
You are not. Sean, you are not. You are not.
Mr. Lee, you are not the father.
Told y'all.
Hold up.
I already knew. I told you.
Don't look at me like that. I don't know God's
Who
plan.
else? It was you that
Did
was.
you just inject God in this? I did not put him in this. I'm just saying. No, I'm just, look, hold on. Now, the plan of Giovanni being on this earth might be God's, but the lie you told about his paternity is your own. So just claim it. You spent 5 years in prison for failing to pay child support for the defendant, Miss Sears' son, Dylan.
That's right.
Mr. Manser, you are not
Oh, God.
his father.
I don't know how devastating this is. I personally do not know. But I do have a friend that went through this, and more of an acquaintance. Told me it was one of the most devastating things he's ever done, or it's ever happened to him. And it was 2 years in, he was still supporting, the child, it's a daughter. And he just noticed that she just wasn't, didn't have any of his features, so he took a paternity test or a DNA test, found out that it wasn't hers after 2 years of supporting her, supporting the mother, and trying to make things work. And he was devastated. He was devastated that it wasn't his. A lot of these men are devastated or are happy that it isn't theirs. He was devastated that it wasn't his. And 2 years of his life was gone, dedicated to someone of not his own blood. It's pretty disgusting.
Oh, man. 5 years in prison.
Do you know? Yes, you know who his father is. Yes, I talked to him still.
knew, but still chose that man to be the father. Why? Because probably he was the provider, probably had money.
In the case of 7-week-old Andrew, Trevor, you are not.
You know, for as much shit we talk about Maury, he did really good job of saving some men, you know. Even if it was just pure entertainment for most people.
Mr. Jackson, you are not the father.
Look at her. Look at them like laughing and smiling when the verdict comes out. Like these women are so malicious doing this. Like they know. They know. But they still choose to go through this circus act to pretend like it might be him, or to do their best and pray to God that the DNA might suddenly change or something. Like it's crazy.
What's funny?
I heard that. It was kind of like, ooh. That's why I laughed.
You took us to school, let me take you there.
Apparently, the American state of Tennessee has just passed a law in its Senate to require fathers to undergo paternity tests for newborn babies. It will now not merely be an option, it'll be mandatory. Basically, under the new law, the state can't go after a man for child support unless he was proven first to be the biological father of said child. It's kind of revolutionary and kind of wild, because it shifts the whole burden of proof, essentially. Before, a man named the father would be assumed legally to be the father. A
Yeah, there wasn't no burden of proof before. It was automatic.
subsequent negative DNA test proving him to not be the father wouldn't mean anything. He'd still be on the hook. Now it looks like this won't be the case anymore. Essentially, before any payment from the father is expected to be made, he will now first undergo a paternity test to see if the kid is actually his. And if it turns out the kid isn't his, he can simply opt out. No problems, no questions asked. Paternity fraud successfully averted. This is actually a huge legal victory for men because too many are forced every year to support children that biology has already proven to not be theirs. Once they sign certain papers and accept the promises of the mothers, they're done for. There's no wiggle room. And there's no injustice, as paternity fraud isn't a criminal offense one can sue for. In about 5% of all pregnancies, the man who thinks he is a biological father really isn't. This doesn't seem like a huge number because 95% of mothers are perfectly honest. But 5% on a global scale, that's millions of fathers duped every year around the world. In France, a man cannot even legally have his child's paternity tested without a court order to prevent social unrest. An insanely unfair...
It's like to prevent social unrest is their reasoning. Why don't you just tell women to, think about who they actually sleep with and train them to maybe sleep at one man at a time, and then this might not be an issue.
situation, but laws such as this are a step in the right direction. But honestly, I really find the idea that this is in Tennessee hilarious.
I also agree that when I first heard that it was in Tennessee, it was pretty funny. That's where I got arrested. That's where I went to jail at, and for that state to be one of the first states to try to pass this law, I thought it was pretty funny.
Of all places, it's probably one of the states that needs a law like that the very most. I do not know enough about family law in Tennessee, but I do know that baby mamas often have a new boyfriend every week in some cases. And it's definitely a good idea to make sure that the right male is being pursued for their contribution to the tiny human that just got born. Of course, the ultimate solution to the issue is for people to use protection and not do things that result in babies unless they're in a solid relationship. But I know very well that it'll never happen because there's always somebody, male or female, that wants kids for the wrong reasons, whether as a way to control the other half, make themselves feel superior, or for a welfare check. States with laws about automatic paternity to the spouse often find themselves dealing with lots of paternity fraud because, let's face it, being married is no guarantee that the wife isn't fucking someone else.
Yep.
Paternity tests are pretty accurate and not as expensive as they once were. To avoid disestablishment proceedings and unnecessary courtroom antics, it's a great idea and might also prevent delay tactics from one side or the other. On top of making it a law, there should also be a fine for anyone who is found to have purposely named the wrong father for whatever reason. When I was working, I ran into a man whose ex kept moving from state to state naming him as the dad of her child every time she signed up for welfare. She did this knowing full well that a DNA test had excluded him years before. That woman should have been charged with fraud and excluded from the welfare rolls at the very least for what she put him through. When I ran into him, she was on her 5th new case against him. That's just wrong in so many ways. A DNA test is not a big production these days.
It's funny, there's less, again, women crying wolf. The more and more women are doing shit like this, the more and more it comes to light, the more and more men are leaving this country, the more and more men are leaving dating.
30 seconds for a swab inside the cheek, and that's all it takes. Of course, the sample must be taken in front of acceptable witnesses to preserve the chain of evidence. But that's generally not a big deal as they're there anyway for something. Child support can be absolutely crippling unless you happen to make good money. If you're not in the position of being able to afford an attorney and are struggling especially in this day and age where it's hard enough to keep a roof over your head with 3 jobs and no financial anchor around your neck. It's one thing if a kid is yours. That's your responsibility.
Agreed.
But it happens far too often to men whose kids they are paying for aren't even theirs. I've seen guys end up homeless, losing a job or taking an income hit because they were already on the razor's edge with the support for kids that weren't theirs. And it's no simple or quick matter to get the support adjusted if that happens, certainly not fast enough before it all goes to shit. All for kids they shouldn't have had to support in the first place unless they were willing to and had the means. Testing should be mandatory in all US states. How many men in the US are raising another man's child without their knowledge? The fact that women can name any man and he is on the hook for child support for 18 years is unjust and unfair.
Yep.
Women claiming those men are fathers when clearly they aren't should spend time behind bars for fraud.
100%
How dare she
agree.
ruin a man's life, his family, his career, and swan off scot-free? Jail the lying toe rag. Anyway, that's all for today on Manhood. Don't forget to smash a like.
Ooh, shout outs to manhood again and Tennessee. You know, I may not like that state personally, but it is doing good things for the well-being of men and the well-being of relationships and marriage. So please like, subscribe down below. I really appreciate that, and I'll catch you guys next time. Ciao.